Hello friends, welcome back to another Value Vintage Cards video. Today I just wanted to share some thoughts. I've really kind of just noticed a lot of reliance on pop reports, a lot of, I don't know, just maybe over-reliance, some potentially misleading information out there. And I just want to kind of share some thoughts and share some cards that I think maybe play into how I use pop reports and how I hope folks are, and not maybe relying too much on what PSA and SGC say about cards and sets. So let me dive in. I think maybe illustrating it will make more sense than me trying to explain it without, giving you something to really look at and think about. All right, so let's start off with the classic T206. When I look at the PSA only pop reports, which is probably, I guess for some of the vintage, maybe it's equal. Some of the newer cards, it's probably the much heavier weight, but something like that. A T206 Cobb. This is the red background, so obviously he has 4 cards in the set. Other than the extreme short prints, which we're going to assume most of those are probably graded with the Wagners and the Planks and things, but of the regular issues, the regular players that are in that set, Cobb's probably the biggest, I would say. Probably, I don't think that's even really debatable. He would be the biggest, like, non-limited production card. So the red background has 2,600, give or take, on PSA's website. So if you're talking 2,600 of those, assume SGC matches, assume there's a bunch ungraded too. That's kind of where I start my basis of what's out there. Now, T206 is weird and unique because someone like Cobb has 4 cards. So there's also cards like this. He has bat on shoulder, bat off shoulder, and then the greenback. The greenback is the biggest dollar one. Bat on shoulder, I believe, is close to the same as the greenback in terms of grading. This is like 1,100 graded with PSA. 11, 1,200, something like that. So is there half as many of those around as there is the red portrait? According to grading, yes. Is that true? Maybe. But that's usually where I start my basis. So when you look at all the lower tier cards in that set, if you see there's 400, 500 graded, I wouldn't assume that card's more scarce. I assume that people have more of those ungraded. With some sets, it's odd, unique, and especially with cards that are that old, you wonder, did people not save the cards of players they didn't know? So maybe it's true that there's just less around. Was the manufacturer having a bias towards certain players so that the people purchasing their products would have more players they know? Is there more Ruths and Garrigs and Cobbs in some of these sets? Sometimes, for sure, and sometimes we are left wondering. So I feel like there's a lot of variables and a lot of factors to it. But with the T206 set, I think that's such a good illustration of how within the same set you'll have production differences. And so the red back, pretty easy to get. Bat on shoulder, a little less. Weird thing is the pricing of those 2 cards is probably about the same if they were in the same condition. So, is that an opportunity for us? Is that a overvalue, undervalue, or just what it is? Because neither one of them is exactly, 89 tops. I don't know. So, just some food for thought on that angle. The other thing that I see a lot of folks using with pop reports for, and I would say I do the same, share this one. So 1969 Top Super Tom Seaver. Thank you, PSA, for finding a case that makes it just rest at an angle. I can try and bang that around, but I don't love doing that either. So just showed this in a different video, but it's such a great example of a card that is not only fairly scarce. I think PSA is graded 117, and SGC is another dozen or so. So somewhere less than 150 graded. I know there's a bunch that are probably ungraded sitting out there. The weird thing with this issue is you don't see these in real low grades often. So are the low grades not being sent in, or is this just I feel like it's a more durable card? So maybe high grades can be more common. Almost 40% of PSA's gradings have come back as a 9 or a 10. So that being said, having a 9 on this thing makes it a little less special, since 40% are 9s and 10s. But there is 100 and some odd of those graded, so it's still, especially for something fairly recent, being the 60s issue, fairly low pop, fairly tough to come by, fairly scarce. So that's a different way of maybe finding something scarce. And Seaver's a bigger name in that set. There's a couple of bigger names, but maybe there's double the amount of somebody else, but he's not going to be like 1/10 of the population. He's going to be a pretty representative submission for grading. So that is something we can do. We can look for 9s and 10s and try to take something that's a pop 150 or 200, maybe if you count the ungradeds, and bring ourselves into that top 40%, 50%, quarter, whatever it might be. I usually assume ungradeds are going to have less 9s and 10s popping up, and maybe that's where all the 2s and 3s are. People haven't submitted them yet. 1939, I'm going to toss this out in a different way to think about things as well. PSA has seen about 1,300 of these. 39 play ball, Ted Williams. That's his rookie card. Mine is in a fantastic 1. And honestly, I do think it is a fantastic 1. If you take a look at this card up close, we end up seeing the one corner is a bit dinged. Might be reflecting too much to really see how dinged it is, which is indicative of how minor the dinging is, but that's got some wrinkle to it. There is, getting the mirror image effect, right there is a pinhole. So if you look at the back even, I don't know that it really shows through all that significantly. I think I kind of found a great example of a 1. And that's what's important. When you see like a pop 1,300, now you can go Seaver and say how many 9s and 10s are there. For me on this card, if this was a 3, 4, 5 and higher, I have to swap out a 3 or 4 big cards to get it. And I would rather have the 3 or 4 big cards. That's just how I collect. So I'm not looking at this as being a pop 1,300. I'm looking at this as being a pop 150 or so, because that's how many are graded A's and 1s. That might include 1.5s, but sub 2 grade. So I don't want the top like 1,000 or so. I'm really kind of fishing on the low end of the scale here. Ungradeds, I usually go very conservative when I assess an ungraded is, because I don't submit, and I usually assume there's a flaw that I'm not seeing, something I'm missing. If I just saw that online, if they didn't disclose that's a pinhole, it might just look like a little blemish in the print or something. So I want to make sure that I'm not getting taken on a card that would be, that might look like it's a 2 if you didn't know. In the back, you don't really see that imperfection. So with something like this, instead of saying it's a pop 1,300, I say it's a pop couple hundred, and then I go searching. So how many 1s look this nice? I will say in the population of 1s, I think that's a pretty gosh darn nice example. So that's just another way of kind of analyzing population and using the reports, but also being realistic that what's going to be not graded, it's probably the lower end cards. If somebody thinks they have a 6, they want that number on it because it's going to be much easier to sell, much easier to preserve. That's, some of these I don't submit for grading for any reason other than, SGC for $1,000 card, it's a $15 slab. Yeah, I can get a slab for $2 or $3, but the price difference now is it's not 0 or 15, it's 15 or a few bucks. So it gets a little bit closer. So last, I'm going to share a few more. So W517, if you're familiar with that, it's a kind of oversized hand cut set. There is a Ruth, there is a Gehrig. I always look to the big card first. So those have a good solid couple hundred graded, I think, between PSA and SGC. Beckett is, not as commonly reviewed and probably doesn't have as many in their populations. And so something like this, I always look to Ruth and Gehrig. So there's a couple hundred of those. That's where the research gets a little tougher. So you have to research and see, did they produce more Ruths and Gehrigs because they knew that was going to be the big exciting find for collectors? Or is there just less of the Jimmy Foxes submitted? So Jimmy Fox, crazy as it is, between PSA and SGC, there's exactly 100 showing on the two registries. So Pop 100 graded. I feel like that's like the ... that never gets addressed. So we have to say it's graded. There's probably a good number of these graded out there. It's a $100, $200 card, and if it's a lower grade, maybe it's a sub $100 card if it's in rough condition. And on high ends, it's hundreds and hundreds maybe, but it's not like you're talking about thousands of dollars. So one of my favorite cards. Absolutely love the Jimmy Fox for a few reasons. So the catcher pose, very youthful. It's 31, so it's before the Gaudis and all the more standard issues of him. But I just think it's such a cool card. They did spell Jimmy with the IE there. They did get both X's in his name, so they did a good job representing Fox in that case. But 4 is a nice middle of the road, but there's 100 of them graded, so we assume that's a pretty tough, scarce issue. But again, I always look to Ruth and Gehrig to see the 200. Something interesting with the W517s is, I'm kind of recently discovering this, there's a mini issue. So I found a card, when I looked at the W517 minis, I don't see a Ruth listed. There is a Gehrig, and I think PSA is graded like 9 Gehrigs. So you take the full-size issue, and there's a couple hundred. You look at the mini, there's 9. I don't know if I found one on SGC. Maybe there's 1. So maybe there's like 10 of them graded. And again, I assume Gehrigs are probably being submitted at a much higher rate than other players. So are they just more submitted, or are there more of them made? But I did pick this up. I'm trying to get kind of a representative of every set. I'll always take an Eddie Collins. There are, if you look at the W517 minis, at any given time you might find a few on eBay or a random auction site, but for the most part, these are not going to be, and it's the same image. It really looks the exact same as the full size. So if I had a Fox mini, but I just want to give some perspective on size of the card and everything else. So it's in a normal size slab. That's in more like the postcard slab. So it is definitely significantly smaller. But this one is kind of fun. When you look at the PSA registry, there are 2. And you look at SGC, there's 1. So there's been officially 3 graded by any of the 2 major grading companies. Also, really weird, all of them are graded 2s. When I looked at Gehrig, I think he had a 2 and then a bunch of A's. So these must not, given their hand cut, I tend to rely a little bit less on the grade, but they must be pretty tough. So I guess a lot of them are in, pretty rough condition comparatively. And I think that Collins, again, I look at these cards sometimes and I look at it and say, it's Eddie with a Y, which is fun. This is back to his A's days, so he's A's, White Sox, A's. He kind of just went back and forth. But blank back, just like the big ones. But just kind of an interesting way to look at things. Like, how scarce is that? I think that is a pretty low population. If Gehrig's that low, I think that's legit. But I don't want to ever be deceived. I don't want to think there's literally, am I holding 1/3 of the Eddie Collins that exist? I don't think so. I'm holding 1/3 of them that are graded. That's a fair statement. But I don't think I'm holding 1/3 of them that exist. So I was looking at pop reports and trying to figure out what could possibly be close to that Eddie Collins for scarcity. So what else has 2 graded with PSA? And I found another card that has exactly 2 graded with PSA. One is an 8 and one is a 9. So there's never been a 10 graded. I'm holding a pretty nice example, but I'm going to guess, because of the design and the colors in this card, I'm going to guess this wouldn't get a 10 by any means. It's probably more 6-7 range at best. And I've got it completely held raw. So I'm going to show, this is probably the first time I've shown a card that I'm actually just holding. But there's only 2 of them graded, so I'm going to assume it's pretty scarce. That's an 87 Donruss, Mark Gubicza. Good pitcher. Let's not talk Mark Gubicza. He actually is a pretty good pitcher, though. I did like him growing up. He was a good number 2 behind Saberhagen. But no, the reality is, if we relied too much on pop reports, we're going to be misled. There's 84 million of those. I probably have dozens of those somewhere in these boxes behind me. So that's relying too much on pop reports leads us down a bit of a silly path. So when looking at the older cards, you always have to have those, those wonders. I don't necessarily think there's black swap finds all over the place, but we see a lot of folks on YouTube, and probably myself included. I show cards that most folks might grade, but it's ungraded. I have no reason to submit it to grade. I've got a T206 Mathewson, a 33 Gaudy Gehrig that I'll never submit those. So those will stay in my collection as they are. So they'll never hit a pop report. So I think my whole thing that kind of just, I don't want to say like concerns me, but just gives me thought is when I see people saying there's exactly this many, like that's just what's been submitted. The phrasing of that is important. So when we say there's 3 of these graded, that's a true statement. When we say it's a pop 3, no, there's a population of 3 that's been graded. So there might be a pop 20 on that card. Still not common. Not everybody's going to have that in their collection, but it's not 3. So just kind of some thoughts, some different ways to look at the gradings, to use the grading. When you're looking at a card, is it more scarce because it's low grade? Could be. Is it more scarce because it's a higher end grade? Could be. Is there variations within the production? Could be. Just all the different ways we can utilize these pop reports, and making sure it's a tool and it's an asset, and it's not a taken as the guide or the Bible. We want to make sure we're using it in the appropriate context. So just some thoughts. If anybody's in the market for a really scarce 87 Donruss Mark Gubicza, I'd be willing to trade that potentially. So just some thoughts. All right, I'll catch up with you guys next time. Hopefully that was some food for thought. And comment below, how much do you rely on the grading? Do you care at all? Where do you use that in your research process to determine, value, scarcity, all the kind of fun stuff. So please share. Always interesting to discuss and see how other collectors are doing it and how the hobby's progressing. So talk to you guys later. See ya.